From north of the 49th parallel, America can be very hard to read these days. It's long touted itself as the land of the free and the home of the brave, but perhaps that's less true now than it once was, judging by a new book from social psychologist Jonathan Haidt and his co-author Greg Lukianoff. It's called The Coddling of the American Mind: How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And with that, we welcome Jonathan Haidt in New York City back to tell us what this is all about. Nice to see you again, Jonathan. How are you doing?
Nice to see you too, Steve.
I want to start with something very small, but of course, often small things tell a bigger story. And the small things I want to start with are called peanuts. Every parent knows that the best way to make enemies at your kid's school is to make them a peanut butter and jam sandwich, because everybody has an explosion about that, and that's verboten. But what is it that you think peanut allergies tell us about the state of American culture today?
In the United States, as in a number of countries, peanut allergies have been rising. And the mystery as to why they're rising is kind of I'd almost say a metaphor for the whole book, but it's actually a homology, meaning it's the same process. What I mean by that is the rate of peanut allergies is only rising in countries that recommend that pregnant women avoid peanuts and avoid giving their kids peanuts. And so when my son was starting preschool, and at the age of 3, we got a long lecture on all the peanut products and things that had been near peanuts and things that looked like peanuts and anything with a pea in it we weren't supposed to bring to school. And later on, as I looked into it, what I discovered is that there was recently a study showing that if they recruited 600 women who'd recently given birth, whose kids were at risk of peanut allergy. Half were given the standard advice to avoid peanuts, keep them away from your kid. Half were told, here's some kind of a snack that is a corn puff with peanut dust on it. Give it to your kid. And at the age of 5, it turned out that the kids who followed standard advice, 14% of them had a peanut allergy. So for the rest of their lives, they're going to have to be careful. And in the half that were given peanuts, 2% had a peanut allergy. The point is, when we're protecting kids, we're protecting them from things that they actually need to get stronger. The immune system needs to be exposed to all kinds of things in order to learn. In the same way, kids need to be exposed. They need to fall down in order to get a sense of balance. They need to be teased and excluded in order to learn how to navigate the social world. They need to take risks on the playground in order to know how to face physical risks when they're older. We've been depriving kids of these things, and this, we think, is one of the major reasons why rates of anxiety, depression, and even suicide are way up among American youth.
If the adverse consequences of infantilizing and overprotecting and doing all of these things that your peanut metaphor just describes, why do we do it?
2 reasons. One is because the natural urge to protect is so strong. We all want to protect our kids. And even though many of us, I talk with a lot of parents here in New York, most of us hate helicopter parenting, but we do it anyway. Because in each particular case, you just want to protect, even though you know that the long run could be harmful. The other reason is that there's a lot of social pressure. So I wanted to let my kids go out alone on Halloween. My 12-year-old son did. We live in New York City. It's actually very, very safe. My 8-year-old daughter was just sort of on the borderline, and I wanted to let her go out, but she had a friend with her, and we'd have to get clearance from the friend's parents. So you risk social shame, and in parts of America, you risk arrest. Beginning in the early 2000s, we started hearing about American parents getting arrested because their 8, 9, 10-year-old kids were caught playing in a park with no adult supervision, and they could get snatched, which never really happens, but that's what we think in our paranoia.
Don't you wish you lived in Utah?
That's right. Yes. Well, overall, I'm still happy I live in New York. But Utah did become the first state in the United States to pass a free-range parenting bill, which specifically says, it's crazy that we have to do this, but it specifically says that you can give your kids some freedom and you won't be arrested for it, that shall not be taken as evidence that you are an unfit parent. And so that's the first step. Every state in the United States has to pass this. And I hear horror stories from Canada, too. There was a father, I think it was in Alberta, he was arrested because his 5 kids, he taught them how to take the bus, and they took the public bus, to get to school. And the oldest was, I think, 12 or something like that. So you've got your problems, too.
What kind of sign of the times is it when you can be arrested for parenting with a bit of a long leash?
So in part, this reflects what Greg and I call problems of progress. So, it used to be 100 years ago, kids were sent to the factories and the coal mines, or 150 years ago. As we get richer, safety standards improve. As we get richer, women get more educated, the birth rate plummets. When I was a kid, there were a lot of families around that had 4 or 5 kids. Now there are very few. When you have one kid, boy, you're more likely to overprotect, to feel you have all your eggs in one basket. So for a lot of reasons, we are investing more in our kids. In America, at least, it's gotten so much more competitive to get into college if you're in the middle class or above and you have high aspirations. So we're taking playtime away from kids because we want them to study piano or violin or math or something else that will help get them into college. Basically, we're taking away the experiences that they most need and giving them experiences that actually aren't going to do anything for them in the long run.
Well, if we allowed kids to play, quote unquote, the right way, which is the way that you think is better for them in the long run, what does that actually look like?
What it looks like is what kids do all over the world, unstructured free play. All over the world, kids are let out. They form play groups, mixed age. It turns out playing in mixed age is really valuable because the older kids learn how to adjust, how to be empathic towards the needs of the little kids. The little kids might get hurt, but because there's big kids around, they don't want to cry, so they learn self-control. They have to make up rules flexibly depending on who's there. They learn skills of self-governance. Basically, kids, when you leave them to their own devices, will invent games, and they're basically learning the skills of democracy. They're learning how to make decisions as a group without having to appeal to a higher authority to come in and punish. It's a very important phrase, moral dependency. Moral dependency is when you can no longer solve your own moral conflicts. You have to appeal to an adult to come in on your side to punish someone else. Beginning, I think, in the 1990s or 2000s, we've been hyper-regulating kids' lives. By the time they get to college, there's always been an adult present. There's always been someone that they can report to. They're often told, if you see something, say something. So beginning around 2013, what Greg and I began to notice is that on college campuses, if a kid overheard a joke they didn't like, or if a teacher was assigning a book or that they didn't like, or a speaker was going to come that they didn't like, they wouldn't just ignore it or talk to the person. They would go to a dean. They would ask for a remedy, some sort of bureaucratic protection. This is moral dependency. It's not the kids' fault. We did this to them when they were younger.
In 2013, there was a new generation that entered the universities, since you've got us onto the post-secondary sector here. And this is how you summarize the so-called iGen. iGen is the first generation that spent and is now spending its formative teen years immersed in the giant social and commercial experiment of social media. What could go wrong, you add sarcastically. So, what did go wrong?
So it turns out the iPhone is invented in 2007. Facebook opens up to the world in 2006. Most teenagers don't have it in 2006, 2007, but by 2009, 2010, a lot, and by 2011, 2012, most American teenagers have a smartphone in their pocket and social media, which they're checking dozens or often hundreds of times a day. For the millennials, that is, we all thought that the college students today were millennials, but now we know that behaviorally, if you look at how they spend their time, if you look at how they are emotionally, there's an amazingly sharp line at birth year 1995. It's about as sharp as birth year 1946, a very sharp line for the baby boom generation. Kids born in 1995 and afterwards had a very different childhood than any previous group in history because so many of them got on social media when they were about 12 or 13. And we didn't know what would happen. Now it looks like it is absolutely devastating to girls. So when boys get smartphones, they spend a lot of time playing video games. There's a big debate as to how bad that is. It's not that bad, especially when they're cooperating, they're running around imaginary worlds killing people, as my son and his friends do. But for girls, there's the social comparison, there's the beauty comparison, how popular you are, fear of missing out, and the nature of girls' aggression is against each other's relationships. Boys' bullying is physical, so social media doesn't change it. Girls' bullying has always been relational, and social media accelerates it by an order of magnitude. So what we're seeing in the United States and the UK, the stats are very, very clear. And I was just looking, I need to do a lot more research for Canada, but I've seen some research that self-harm, that is cutting yourself to the point where you have to be admitted to the hospital, is going up in Canada as well. In all 3 countries, girls' mental health is plummeting. Again, I don't know as much about Canada, but in the UK and the United States, rates of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide The suicide rate for American teenage girls is up enormously. For boys, it's up 25% from the first decade of the century. For girls, it's up 70%. So this is a catastrophe. We're not sure that most of that is from social media. We don't know. But that's the most likely candidate.
While you were in the midst of that answer, we did put up a graph that showed the percentage of male versus female college students in the United States who say they have a psychological disorder. And while the lines are not exactly what you would call a hockey stick, they are certainly trending in the wrong direction. You say young people are growing up more slowly these days. Now, why would that be the case, given the infinite added amounts of sophisticated gadgetry and wizardry and knowledge they have access to right now?
Because you don't grow up by learning things like facts. You don't grow up by doing things on an app. You grow up by pushing the envelope. You grow up by doing things that you weren't able to do the year before. And so the reason why I say kids grow up slowly, I'm taking that straight from Jean Twenge. She's a professor at the University of San Diego. And she has this wonderful book, iGen. iGen or Gen Z. In Canada, you may know it as Gen Z. It's the generation after the millennials. And what she shows is that if you look at what percentage of them get a driver's license by the time they're 18. When I was a kid, I mean, if the DMV was closed, you might wait a day, but you got your driver's license the minute you could. But nowadays, a lot of kids don't even bother to get a driver's license because they don't go out as much. They don't date as much. They don't have a job as often. They don't drink as much. They don't do drugs as much. What are they doing? They're sitting at home, sitting on their bed, engaging with each other over social media. They're not pushing any envelopes. They are playing social games that, maybe in theory they could have had some benefits, but it looks like they are harmful. Basically, kids are not getting the adult-like experiences that teenagers traditionally got. So when they arrive at college, a lot of them fall apart. At American universities, this is all over. At American universities, every place I've been, and we've got data in the book to back it up, the mental health service is saying, we're overwhelmed. Our waiting list is now months long. We're going to have people committing suicide because we can't get to them. So this is just since about 2013, 2014. As soon as iGen or Gen Z, as soon as they arrive on campus, the need for mental health resources skyrockets.
Well, let's take a few moments here and talk about some of life's, I think you call them the great untruths. And we know the great line from Nietzsche, which is, of course, everything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You seem to think we have this completely backwards nowadays. Explain why.
Yeah. So the basic principle, the basic psychological principle there is anti-fragility. That's Nassim Taleb's word for systems that gain from disorder. So as we were talking about with the peanut allergies, the immune system is anti-fragile. Kids are anti-fragile. That means if you protect them, you hurt them. You have to let them have graded experiences to the point where they can fend for themselves from the common threats of life. So that's the whole point of our book, is that we are overprotecting. We're doing all sorts of things purportedly to help kids. A lot of them backfire. We've got to stop doing that.